How's everyone doing tonight? Good. I just want to start off by actually saying, okay, I'm emotional now. At the beginning of worship, I was standing at the back and I was just watching all of you guys worshiping, and I just really felt the heart of the Father in that moment, of just how proud He is of all of us together as a family. So I just really want to thank you for being here tonight and journeying with us and praising God with us together and just being part of us, because we wouldn't be what we are without you. So just felt I want to say that. As Josh has said, we've been journeying around this topic of abundance, and if I'm really honest, I had this moment during this month where I came home after a really long day of work, and I felt really stressed and I felt really sad, and I tried to shake off that feeling, and I just couldn't. And one of my mates went, "Hey, how are you, Judith? Are you living in abundance?" Parissas, his new favorite word. And I just was thinking in my head, I didn't say it, but in my head I was just thinking, go away, I don't want to talk to you, I was like, I just want to be sad. I'm just, I don't feel like I'm living in abundance right now. So I answered, no, I don't think I live in abundance. He's like, no, you are living in abundance. So I just walked away and just sat down and felt a little bit pitiful for myself for a while, and then suddenly came to that point where I was like, I feel really sad right now, but I know we're on this journey with a shepherd, so I just asked him, I just said, Father, I feel sad and I can't shake off this feeling, but what does your abundance look like right now in this moment in my sadness? And from then, I just spent like a really great evening with the Father just journeying that through, and he just showed me what his abundance looked like. And I just felt to share that, just to say, we're all in this together. We really are. And I think we also need each other to remind each other of the truth that he has spoken over us and the truth that he has brought to our lives, that he has brought life, abundant life to us. But in the moments when we don't have a clue what that looks like, just go and ask him. So just quickly want to summarize the last few weeks, but I need your help. So the first week, I started off by talking about promises. So I talked about the promises of God are yes, and they're already fulfilled in Jesus, and we are giving our amen, actually not to the circumstances, but Jesus has become our amen. So we're saying, I agree to who Jesus is. And then Josh started talking about parissas, abundance, and he talked about the shepherd and what it means that we're actually not called to just be believers, but to actually be followers. But that sometimes means, if we're following the shepherd, that to follow in him, we have to unfollow some other things. So we looked at fear and shame and dissatisfaction. And then last week, we talked about knowing his voice, what it means to be still and know that he is God. Do you remember the storm, the disciples in the storm, and how the storm actually knew the voice of Jesus, and how when we know he's going to speak to us, and actually knowing God, that's what defines our reality. And this week, I had something happening to me that I've never had, but I always wanted. I actually dreamt part of my sermon. How cool is that? So in my dream, I was like writing my sermon. And I really strongly felt how the Father was saying, tell them that I made them brave and courageous. Us as Joshua generation, he has made us brave and courageous. And that's not just something that you have the feeling, okay, now I have to be brave and I have to be courageous. No, it's actually what he calls us to be. He calls us to be brave and courageous. That's our identity, and that's the spirit that he has put on the inside of us. And by being brave and courageous, I believe that he has called us to be proactive rather than reactive. And by being proactive, it actually means that you can decide if you go or if you don't go, or if you wait. And if you're proactive, you're determined, you know where you're going, you have a vision in front of you, and you actually know the authority and the influence that you're carrying. Where when you're reactive, it's more like you're trying to juggle everything that's coming your way, and you're reacting to the circumstances. It's quite easy to be controlled by the circumstances. You can't really make any decisions, and you start to become hesitant and a little bit unsure. And that can feel quite overwhelming, especially as we're going through life. And last week, Josh touched a little bit on, sometimes we have to fight battles in our lives. Sometimes there are big battles, and maybe you're going through a big battle right now, or through small battles, or you're At times it almost feels like, you're walking on the water, and it's the question, this next step, is the water actually going to carry me? Yes or no? Potentially we feel a little bit like that, together as Joshua generation right now. I already know the water is carrying us, so we're all good. But it's this, okay, is this actually carrying me or not? And that can feel quite intimidating at times. And sometimes, in the face of a battle or in the face of the unknown, we can feel powerless. And we just feel like we want to run away, or we might even feel defeated before we even have tried. But God really calls us to be brave and courageous and to walk in his peace that surpasses all understanding. The Bible talks so much about peace. God is called the Prince of Peace, and Yahweh Shalom, the I am peace, the God of peace. In the New Testament, Paul talks about the peace that surpasses our understanding. So really that goes, around all the circumstances. That's always how I picture it. And often when we think about peace in our life, we just think about it as something that we have or we don't have, or something that God gives us. And again, often it's quite reactive. When we're in a situation, we're like, oh no, I'm freaking out. God, give me peace. That's quite often how we do it. And peace quite often has to do with our emotions. And I totally believe that, that's when God comes in, right? When we feel overwhelmed, he comes in with his peace. And peace is one of the fruits of the Spirit. So I totally believe that that's something that he has for us and he gives to us. And if we ask him for more, it's going to increase. But actually, if you look at the world and you look at peace and war, you find a different dimension in that as well. Because actually, if there isn't peace between two countries, there's war, and that's more than just a feeling, but that's what they live in. It's a condition, it's the state that they're in. And our grandparents and potentially parents' generation, they might have even experienced war in their life, and sometimes for us that's a little bit distant, although I think a lot of the things that have been happening over this past year, definitely have brought that reality a lot closer to us. And the world is longing so much for peace. And I found a definition on the internet about peace that said, peace is a stress-free state of security, calmness, that comes when there is no fighting or war, everything coexisting in perfect harmony and freedom. So peace is when everything is coexisting in perfect harmony and freedom. So when we look at the world, or we look at our lives, not everything is coexisting in perfect harmony or freedom. So it's this whole question of what is real, what is reality in that. So God says, have peace. So do I now live in the peace, or do I live in the situation that I'm actually facing, or can they coexist? Those are all questions that are like in our head. And often what we actually find is that the biggest battle about peace in our life is actually happening here and there, in our head and in our heart. And often that battle is bigger than the physical battle in front of us. So the battle of what we're thinking and what we're feeling about what's happening in our life is often a lot bigger. And there's a story in the Bible about one of the disciples, Peter, and I think, it doesn't say it, but I think that he must have had a battle over peace in his head. There's this one passage where the disciples are on the boat and Jesus is walking on the water towards them. A lot of you will know that story. And Peter actually says to Jesus, call me out upon the water. And Jesus calls him. He says, come, Peter. And Peter makes a few steps and he walks on the water, which I think is pretty cool. He walks on the water, but then suddenly he realizes what's actually happening, and suddenly he sees the circumstances. He suddenly sees, I'm walking on the water, and that shouldn't really be possible, and I see the wind. And he loses focus on Jesus, the one that he was walking towards. And his focus went towards the circumstances, and suddenly he started sinking. And I think that's when, the battle around peace started in his head. But I find it really interesting because it's not that, he was afraid beforehand before he even made the first step onto the water, but he was already walking on the water So I have the feeling he was already doing something supernatural, something that he could only do because Jesus had called him out and had said, "Come, trust me, you're safe." But as he was walking, suddenly he wasn't focused anymore on the eyes of Jesus that said, "Trust me," but suddenly he became aware of his own inability. But being proactive, being brave, being courageous, is to trust Jesus when he says come, and not to be reactive to what the circumstances around us say, that the water shouldn't be carrying you. No, if Jesus says the water will be carrying you, the water will be carrying you. Because he will always lead us to a place of peace. We heard that last week about how the shepherd always leads us beside still waters. And I love how the psalm continues, because the next verse is, "And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Every time I hear that, I'm like, what? It's so crazy to say that. And the person who actually wrote this, David, if you read his story in the Bible, you actually know that there have been times when he was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. He was really walking in that. And if I look at my own life, often when I walk through the valley of a stressful week, I fear evil, even though I thought I knew that God is with me. But there's something about David in this psalm that really strikes me, where I'm like, I want to know what you build your trust in. I want to know what you build your life on. But so often in difficult situations, so often when we're going into the unknown or when we're facing a battle, we are just asking the why questions. And that's absolutely okay. But we're asking, why now, God? Why me? Why is this happening? Why you're not intervening in the situation this way or that way? But I just want to challenge us tonight to ask the what question of what is the battle that we're fighting? What is Jesus saying? And what is our life built on? Because when we look at this situation, David does not deny that terrible situations are happening in our life, but still he is full of trust in God, and he is calm, and he just seems to be full of peace in this moment. And I want us to look at a passage in the Bible. If you want to open up your Bibles and your phones, and we're also going to have it on the screen on 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's a story of David and Goliath. And that's actually a real battle, a real fight that David had to fight. So David became later on king of Israel. But at this point of the story, he was still a young boy. And he was one of 7 children. And he was the youngest one. And he was the one who was looking after the sheep all day long. And he was almost like the son that everyone forgot about, that never anyone really remembered. And at this time, king over Israel was Saul, and he was in battle. The Israelites were in battle against the Philistines. And we're just going to jump straight in. When they're in the battle, and I'm actually not going to read this, I'm just going to tell you. And basically, the Israelites and the Philistines were in the battle, and the Philistines had this really, really great warrior called Goliath. And he's described as over 9 feet tall. So if you look at me, that's not quite, but nearly double my height. And he was like really hinged, really well trained, their best warrior. And he said to them, "Come and bring one of your men, bring me your strongest warrior, and he should fight against me. And if he wins, we're yours. If I win, all of you are ours." Okay? So it was all about, not a big battle, but it was 1-to-1. One warrior against one warrior. And you must imagine, so he was like 9 feet tall. Couldn't really find anyone who was 9 feet tall. And men at that point were about my height. And I can tell you from experience, my height is very short. I notice that every time when I go to the grocery store and I try to reach for the bread. But thank God, he created tall men that always are really kind and help me. moving on. But, okay, so basically, most of the army was my height, and he was really tall and really, really strong. And just looking at him must have intimidated most of the men. And they weren't just, any weak man. They were like the strongest man of Israel. So one day, Jesse, David's father, said to David, "Go and bring some food to your oldest brothers," because 3 of the oldest brothers of David were part of the army at the battlefront. So he went there, and he was meant to give them the food and just make sure that they're okay. So David arrives and hears about this whole story, but his response isn't one of, "I'm afraid, I'm intimidated, I must go away." His response is, "Let me fight him." How crazy is that? He's really young. Let me fight him. And everyone says, no, 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 but eventually he goes and speaks to King Saul. So we're just going to read from verse 32, where it says, "David said to Saul, 'Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him.' Saul replied, 'You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy. He has been fighting man from his youth.' But David said to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it returned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine.' Saul said to David, 'Go, and the Lord be with you.' Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried to walk around because he was not used to them. 'I cannot go in these,' he said to Saul, 'because I'm not used to them.' So he took them off. He then took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine." And then verse 45, David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." And then jumping to verse 47, "All those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or spear of the Lord that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him, reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, and slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into the forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. David won. So again, we have this massive, try to make myself as big as I can, this massive warrior, probably undefeated, and we've got this little David who was untrained. All he had was his experience while he was looking after his father's sheep. None of the other men from the army of Israel went up to him. All those men were strong, they were trained. None of them. They were frightened. But David, he had a different perspective than all of these men. And he lived in a different reality. And he had a different spirit. He had a spirit that was brave and courageous inside of him. And I believe that the men, when they looked at Goliath, they just compared their ability, to fight against Goliath. And they said, okay, we can't do that. But David was different. In this situation, he did not look at the circumstances, and he did not look and compared his own ability to fight Goliath, but he looked at what his God can do. David knew whose battle this was. Verse 47 says it was the Lord's. It's the Lord's battle. He didn't try and think, am I strong enough? Can I defeat him? No, he knew the strength of his Lord. And he knew, because of this place of relationship and intimacy that he had while he was just, looking after the sheep, he knew that his God is faithful, and he knew what his God was capable of doing. And that's the same in our lives. We have the feeling we're fighting battles, but our battle is the Lord's as well. And sometimes in those moments, where we're standing, from where we're standing, all that we can see is this massive giant in front of us. And what we actually have to do is to take a step back. Because it's almost like we're living in two different realities. But if we take a step back, we actually start to realize that none of us could have ever saved our own life in this world. None of us. We can't save our life. But actually, Jesus has come, and he has won the victory over our lives. He has paid the price, and now we have eternal life. But no one can ever take that away from God. So when he said, it is finished on the cross, then if you belong to him, you're part of that. It's a done deal. It's a done deal. The victory has been won. That's our reality that we're standing in. I love how Paul writes in Romans that we're more than just conquerors. And you can read that for yourself, but he gives us this whole list of neither death nor life, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, and he goes on and on and on. Nothing of that can ever separate us from the love of God. We might still be fighting a battle, but we're not being ruled by the circumstances of that battle. We're not being ruled by people that come against us or by the enemy that comes against us. We already know that he tries to steal and kill and destroy as much as he can, but actually he has lost the battle already, and he is on his way out. That's what he's doing. He's on his way out. And he has already, I think it's really kind that he even says that to us, that the enemy tries to kill, steal, and destroy. But then he says, but I have come to give you abundant life. And that's what we're standing on. And when we're taking this step back, we're actually realizing where we are positioned, that we are positioned in heavenly places, that we are actually part of God's kingdom, and the kingdom of God is one of joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. And his kingdom has been manifested on earth through Jesus. And his kingdom is within us, it is here, and it is yet to come. So that's why we sometimes have the feeling we're in those two realities of, when I'm standing here, I'm not denying that this battle is right in front of me, that this giant that seems so huge, I can never overcome it, is right in front of me. Maybe even like he's trying to punch me and, he gets me in the face. We're not denying that this is happening. And yet, if we take a step back, change our perspective, we also know that we're part of the kingdom of God. So, to have his joy, peace, and righteousness, to have his peace, is not just something that we get, but it's something that we live under and that we live in. So when we step back and we know this perspective, we know that we are seated in heavenly places. We know what he has done for us. We know that he has won the victory. We know that the enemy is on his way out. We know that peace is not just something that we carry, but it's something that we live in. And we know that the spirit that he has placed inside of us, which is a spirit that's brave and that's courageous, with all of that, we can then step into the situation. And even though it feels like a battle is going on, our heart can be at peace. Peace is more than just a feeling. We might still face the giants, the battles, the unknown. But we can make the step on the water because we know that he has called us and he has said, come, it's safe. We're not defined by the circumstances. We're not denying that they're there, but we're not defined by them.